Okay, so before we move on, I'm just curious about putting this into our main setup and just seeing how it looks on our branch, for no other reason than I just generally want to see it with some shaders on it and some lighting. So let's quickly just jump over and set that up quickly before we do our next plant. So I'm going to jump back to our object level here, and I am going to turn off our plant A geometry so it's not visible, and let's go inside our setup. Let's come back to our render camera as well. This is where we were before. So instead of using our little pyramid here with the colors on, let's put down an object merge, and we can bring in our plant. So we're going to click on our object operator here, come to our plant A, and just load in our plant A underscore out and accept. We're going to transform this into this object. And there it is, nicely lining up along our Z axis. Let's next put this into our copy to points. Remind ourselves that we do in fact have pack and instance enabled, so we are using instancing. And if we view this now, we can see we have them copied along here. We can scrub through and we can see them animating on. Let's just add some more of these. I'm going to come to our scatter. Let's maybe go to 6,000 for now. See how that looks. And already that's looking pretty cool. Maybe just try 5,000 for now. So we can scrub through, we can see they are growing on like that. So we've got our normal and up controlling this. We've made our orient attribute, and we can use our orient rotation here to just sort of randomize some of the directions of these. So let's just name this, because we forgot to do it before. Rotate orient. We'll leave our axis on the Z axis because we want to rotate around our normal, and we can just use this to essentially rotate around our normal. So you can see they're all sort of slowly moving around that. Let's randomize this now. So I'm going to put up here times random attribute pt num. We did this before, so we're just generating a random number based on our point number. And in fact, instead of just using pt number, let's just add a random number to this as well, just any number here. If we just use random pt number everywhere throughout our scene, we'll just be getting the same random numbers each time. But if we add a number to this is called a seed, we can essentially get different random numbers for different operations. So it's a good idea just to randomize these things up sometimes. So we're now multiplying this angle by a random number. So now some of these will be moving in a full 360 degrees and some of them will be moving somewhere in between. As well as this, we could also maybe just adjust our p-scale for a few of these. At the moment we've set up our p-scale to be somewhere between 0.01 and 0.036. We could just maybe increase the size of a select number of these. To do this, I'm going to put down a point wrangle. I'm going to put it down here. We could really put it down anywhere, but let's put it here and just put random increase p-scale. Let's say let's put down a random number based on our point number again, plus another random number. So if this random number is less than, let's make a float slider called threshold. I'm just going to put that in commas. Then do the following, and we're going to do at p-scale times equals channel float, make another slider, and this is going to be called p-scale underscore mult. I'm going to click on our button here to create these sliders for us. And then just to explain, so p-scale times equals is exactly the same as if I was to write this. If I just copy this a second, paste it. So this means pscale equals attribute pscale times channel float. So you can basically save yourself time by, instead of typing all that, you can just put times equals and it means exactly the same thing. So we will use that instead. And then what's going on at the top here is we are generating a random number between 0 and 1. And then we've got a slider here that's called threshold. So we can increase this. You can see what's happening here is we are actually selecting a range. So if our random number that we've generated, and these random number could be between 0 and 1, if it's less than 0.0314, then do this. And what we're doing here is we're actually multiplying our p-scale, and here we're actually multiplying it by 0, so these are actually scaling down to nothing. So you can see this is quite a useful thing I use a lot. You've got this controller here for threshold where you can set either nothing if it's 0, or you can set it to 100% if it's 1. So we could set this all the way down to maybe, I don't know, 0.75, 0.075, and then we can control our p-scale separately. So we can have 0, or we could increase it much larger. And then we can just go through and adjust that. Now on top of this, instead of using a random number here, let's also make this a slider that we can adjust. I'm going to choose channel I for channel integer and just call this seed. Create that. Now we've got a seed value here. So as we adjust this, we get a different random distribution. So if we just want to adjust the way it's looking a little bit, we can sweep through this. The reason I use an integer instead of a float is just that as I'm scrubbing through, if I like a particular arrangement, I can just easily see this is 3. It's not like a number like 2.134, which is going to be harder to find and try and recreate as I'm moving around here. So I just find integer a little bit easier for me. Okay, let's bring this down a little bit more in terms of the threshold and maybe just make the p-scale 1.5, so it's just a little bit bigger. So it's just adding a little bit of variation to our instances here. Okay, so next let's come down here and let's just put a null down after our copy to points. And we can call this instances underscore out. Connect this to our copy to points. And then let's just go up a level. And let's create a new geometry container, and we're going to bring our instances into this to render. So if I create a new geo container here, I'm going to call this render underscore instances. I'm going to tap C and just color this the same color as the other one. Let's dive inside, double clicking on it, and let's just put down an object merge. For our object, we're going to come up here and we're going to come to our setup, which is here, and we're going to choose our instances out null and accept. We're going to transform into this object. So this now just means that we have a container here that's always going to have the output of our setup here selected. We can be up here and we could be on any node. We could have this selected, just these points. But when we come up to the top, we know that this is still going to be pointing to that same place. So it's a really good way of setting things up. Okay, so let's next put a shader on this and we can have a quick look and see how it's looking with our lighting. I'm going to come over to our material setup. I'm going to put down a RS material builder. Let's just name this instances for now. We'll change this later, but this will just be a quick test geometry we can do. Let's just copy this with Control C, come back to our object context, and in the render instances, for now we're just going to put it up here under render in this material slot and just do Control V and paste it. You could also just select it from this as well. Nice and easy. Okay, so let's open up our render view. And before we press render, we're actually going to stop because although we are using instances here on our copy to points, so this is nice and memory efficient, Redshift isn't going to pay any attention to that. It's going to unpack all our geometry into one single big polygon. It's going to be quite a bit. It's going to take quite a while to render, potentially. So what we need to do is, as well, just come to our container here. We're going to come up to our Redshift OBJ tag. We're going to come to our instancing section, and we're just going to enable instance SOP level packed primitives. And that just means that whenever it sees instances inside, it's going to make sure it converts them to to Redshift packed primitives. So with that enabled, we can now press render and everything will be nice and quick for us. So there we go with our first flowers on our branch. Just going to scale this across a little bit so we can keep working. Just going to adjust this shader a little bit. Come back to our material here. Open up our instances. And for this, I'm just going to put a sort of a start of a material here. It's not going to be the final one, but let's give it a diffuse color, maybe something in the blue. I'm going to bring our diffuse weight down a little bit so it's not quite as strong. And I'm going to bring up my backlighting translucency. So translucency is essentially used usually for things like paper or thin fabric, anything that's like single-sided but has sort of translucent light coming through the back. This is also very good for kind of like faking subsurface scattering. It's definitely not as powerful as the proper subsurface scattering we have down here, but it's very quick to render, so I use this a lot. So I'm going to set maybe this to be, I don't know, like a yellow, bring up the color, bring up the value, maybe bring down the weight a bit. We're getting this nice sort of blended look between these two colors, which kind of makes it feel quite nice and natural, or at least kind of organic to me. I think maybe I might go for more of a pinky color. Maybe push this into more of a yellow. Maybe bring up the weight a little bit more. Something like this. I'm also going to come down here and I'm going to increase our reflection roughness so the reflections aren't quite as sharp, maybe about 0.35 or so. So let's have a look at this, and here is a first look at our shaded plants. We can scrub through this as well, go back, might take a few seconds to reload. But I think that's looking pretty cool. Let's stop this for now. So we've got our basic first shader for our instances here. We have set up our render instances geometry node as well as our branch. We've set up the basics for bringing in our plant and copying this onto the points. And we're now going to move on and start creating the rest of our plants in the next lesson.